There is a particular kind of silence that lives inside a motorcycle garage. It is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of concentration, of a man so completely inside what his hands are doing that the rest of the world has stopped being relevant. Tools arranged on a rubber mat in the order they'll be needed. A fluorescent light buzzing faintly overhead. The smell of oil and gasoline, so familiar it no longer registers as a smell. It registers as home. Cole Denton had been inside that silence for 3 hours on the afternoon Sergeant First Class Sarah Merritt walked through the door of the Iron Brotherhood MC clubhouse in Killeen, Texas. He was 47 inches from the ground, his knees on a folded moving blanket, his torso bent over the engine of a 1984 shovel head that had been giving him grief since February. His hands were black to the wrist. His reading glasses, the ones he never wore in front of the other members, were pushed up on his nose. There was a smear of something across his left cheek that he wouldn't discover until that evening. He heard the boots before he saw them. Not because the boots were loud, but because they were wrong. Every member of the Iron Brotherhood had a particular way of walking across that concrete floor. Cole knew each one without looking up. Hatch shuffled slightly on the right. Preacher lifted his heels too high. Dale Pruitt had a tendency to drag the toe of his left boot. These boots landed differently. Evenly. Left, right. Measured. Deliberate. Military. Cole set down the wrench. He took off his glasses. He stood up slowly, the way a man his age stands up from a concrete floor after 3 hours. Carefully, with the full awareness that his knees are not what they were at 30. He turned around. She was standing just inside the open bay door, and the afternoon light was behind her. So for one moment, she was just a silhouette, the shape of a person in uniform, shoulders squared, hands loose at her sides. Then his eyes adjusted, and he could see her face. She was young, 28, maybe 29. Dark hair pulled back, so tight it seemed to pull at the corners of her eyes. A jaw set the way jaws get set when someone is doing something they've decided to do and have already moved past the question of whether they should. She was looking at him the way people look at someone they've been searching for. Cole didn't recognize that look. He had been on the other side of it once, a long time ago, in a different life. He knew what it meant when someone found the person they'd been trying to find. He just didn't know, in that moment, why she was looking for him. "You Cole Denton?" she said. Her voice was level. Not aggressive. Not soft. Just steady. The voice of someone trained to deliver information without indicating how much the information cost them. "Depends," Cole said. "On who's asking." "Sergeant First Class Sarah Merritt," she said. "Fort Cavazos, 2nd Armored Division." Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up a shop rag from the workbench and wiped his hands. Not because his hands were particularly cleaner by the end of it, but because it gave him something to do while he figured out what to say next. "You're a long way from post," he said. "Yes, sir," she said. "I am." To understand what Sarah Merritt was doing in that garage on a Tuesday afternoon in March, you have to go back 6 months. You have to go back to a Tuesday night in September on Route 190, 2 miles east of the Fort Cavazos main gate, at approximately 11:47 p.m. You have to go back to the accident. The rain had started around 9 that evening, and by 11 it was coming down in the particular way that Central Texas rain comes down in September. Not in drops, but in sheets, horizontal, the kind of rain that finds every gap in clothing you thought was waterproof. The kind of rain that turns headlights into smears of light and makes every road look like every other road. Sarah had been driving back from San Antonio. She had driven to San Antonio that morning to see her mother, who had been in and out of the hospital for 3 months with a condition the doctors kept describing with words that didn't fully land. She had spent 8 hours at her mother's bedside. She had driven back in the dark and in the rain on a highway she knew well, but not well enough for what happened next. The other driver ran the light at FM 2410. That is the fact of it, clean and simple. The other driver, a 22-year-old coming off a double shift at a warehouse in Coppers Cove, ran the light at FM 2410, and his truck met Sarah's sedan at the intersection with a force that pushed her car 40 feet off the road, through a chain-link fence, and into a drainage ditch that had, in the last 2 hours, filled with 6 inches of water. The young man with the truck was shaken, but unhurt. He called 911 immediately and then, without understanding why, without thinking clearly, without making a decision that deserved the name decision, he drove away. He would turn himself in the following morning. He would spend the next year in legal proceedings that would resolve in ways that felt to him both fair and devastating simultaneously, the way consequences often do. But that is not this story. This story is about the 11 minutes between when Sarah's car went into that ditch and when the ambulance arrived. The ditch was not visible from the road at night in the rain. There was a gap in the chain-link fence where the car had gone through, but in the dark and the rain, with headlights already struggling, the gap was just a gap. It could have been anything. It could have been nothing. Most people, driving past at 11:47 in the rain, would not have looked twice at it. There were 11 vehicles that passed that gap in the 11 minutes before help arrived. 2 of them slowed slightly. Neither stopped. The reasons people don't stop are as varied as the people themselves. Some are afraid. Not afraid of the person in the ditch. Afraid of what stopping might mean. Afraid of liability. Afraid of becoming involved in something they can't control. Some are tired and their brains file the gap in the fence under not my problem before the conscious mind even has a chance to vote. Some simply don't see it clearly enough to be sure they saw it at all, and by the time uncertainty resolves, they've already passed, and going back feels like more of a commitment than they're ready to make. None of this makes them bad people. It makes them people. Denton was heading back to Killeen from a chapter meeting in Lampasas. He was riding alone because he preferred it, had always preferred it when the meeting was over and he needed to decompress. The meeting had run long, and there had been a disagreement about finances that he was still turning over in his mind. Not angry exactly, just chewing on the way he chewed on things, slowly, methodically, from every angle. He almost didn't see the gap in the fence. He saw it because of the rain. In the rain, headlights at road level catch things at strange angles. The gap in the chain-link fence, the way it was torn and bent, it caught his headlight for half a second in a way that nothing in the normal order of a roadside would catch it. His brain registered that's wrong before his eyes could articulate why. Denton had been riding for 29 years. In 29 years, a man develops a relationship with the road that is difficult to describe to someone who doesn't ride. He notices things at 60 miles an hour that a car driver wouldn't notice at 20. His peripheral attention had been trained by decades of watching for gravel, for gaps in pavement, for the particular way an intersection changes when something is wrong with it. He slowed. He stopped. He turned around. She was in the driver's seat with the airbag deployed and the car at a 15-degree angle in 6 inches of water. The driver's side window was cracked. Not shattered, cracked, and she was conscious. He could see her moving as he came down the embankment, could see her trying to orient herself, her hands moving over the airbag, over the steering wheel, over her own face the way hands move when a person is trying to figure out what's wrong with their body. "Hey," Cole said, loud enough to be heard over the rain, not loud enough to frighten her. She turned her head toward him. In the beam of his flashlight, she looked young. She looked the age his daughter had been the year she graduated high school. She looked like someone who had been going somewhere specific and had gotten very interrupted. "Can you move?" he said. "My shoulder," she said. "And my head." "Don't move your head," he said. "Can you open the door?" The door was wedged. He pulled it. The hinge protested, but the door came open, and 6 inches of water immediately moved toward the opening. And he reached in and said, "I've got you. Give me your good arm." "I don't know you," she said. This was a reasonable thing to say. This was, under the circumstances, an exactly correct thing to say. A woman in a ditch in the rain at midnight, a stranger reaching into her car. Her caution was not irrational. It was, in fact, precisely the right response. "No," Cole said. "You don't. Your car is in a ditch and you're injured and there's water coming in. You can decide how much that matters." She looked at him for 2 seconds. Then she gave him her arm. He got her up the embankment and onto the shoulder of the road. He called 911. He took off his cut,
I've got you.
his
Hold
leather
on.
vest with the Iron Brotherhood patches.
Easy
and
now.
put it around her shoulders, not out of any chivalric impulse, but because she was shaking and the rain was cold, and it was the only thing he had that was dry enough to help. She sat on the guardrail with her right arm across her chest and her left hand holding the cut closed, and she looked at him. "You with a motorcycle club?" she said. She could see the patches on the vest, the colors, the symbols now visible in the flashlight's beam. Iron Brotherhood, he said. Killeen chapter. Are you going to stay? She said. Until the ambulance gets here, he said. Yes. Why? She said. He looked at her. She was asking directly. Not accusatory, not ungrateful. Just asking. She was a person who asked direct questions. He could see that already. Because you're in a ditch, he said. And I'm not. The ambulance arrived 9 minutes later. In those 9 minutes, Denton sat on the guardrail beside Sergeant First Class Sarah Merritt, and they did not talk much. She was conserving herself. He could see her managing her own pain, measuring her breathing, doing what trained people do when their bodies are sending signals they need to process without being overwhelmed by. He did not try to fill the silence. He had never been a man who filled silence for the sake of filling it. When the paramedics came down the road with their lights, he stood up. Sarah turned her head, carefully, the way he'd told her to, and said, "What's your name?" "Cole," he said. The paramedics were at them then, professional and efficient, moving her toward the stretcher. Cole stepped back to give them room. He picked up his cut from her shoulders, and she looked back at him over the paramedic's arm. "Cole," she said again, the way people repeat a name when they're trying to make sure it sticks. "You're going to be okay," he said. Then he walked back to his bike, put on the cut that was still damp from the rain, and rode the rest of the way to Killeen. He didn't tell anyone what had happened that night. Not because he was ashamed of it. Not because he was particularly proud of it. Because it hadn't occurred to him that it was the kind of thing you told people. He'd seen something wrong. He'd stopped. She'd gotten help. That was the full accounting of it, as far as he was concerned. He went home, peeled off his wet gear, stood under a hot shower for 15 minutes, and went to bed. He was thinking about the chapter finance meeting when he fell asleep. Sarah spent 11 days in Killeen Medical Center. Fractured clavicle, grade 2 concussion, 3 cracked ribs from the seatbelt, doing exactly what seatbelts are designed to do. Lacerations across her left forearm from the cracked window. Nothing that wouldn't heal. Everything that hurt. On the 3rd day, when her head was clear enough to reconstruct the sequence of events with any reliability, she started asking questions. The man who helped me, she told Specialist Travis Bowman, who was sitting with her because she had no family in Killeen and he was the most conscientious person in her unit. There was a man who stayed with me until the ambulance came. I need to know who he was. The paramedics said nobody was there when they arrived, Travis said. He was there until right when they got there, Sarah said. He would have stepped back. He wasn't the type to be in the way. What do you know about him? His name was Cole, she said, and he rode with a motorcycle club. Iron Brotherhood. Travis wrote this down. The search took 3 weeks. It was not an official investigation. Sarah was not injured in the line of duty. This was a personal matter. It was the kind of investigation that happens informally between people who want to know something and have access to enough of the world to find it out. Travis Bowman talked to the paramedics who'd worked the scene. He checked 911 dispatch records. He found a public photograph of Cole Denton at the Land Passes chapter meeting, time-stamped at 9:45 p.m. traveling back toward Killeen. On Route 190, the timeline matched. Travis brought the name to Sarah on a Tuesday morning in October, 3 weeks after the accident, 1 week after she'd returned to light duty. Cole Denton, Travis said. Iron Brotherhood MC, Killeen chapter. Been a member for 16 years. Works as a machinist at a shop off Rancier Avenue. 53 years old. Sarah looked at the name written on the notepad. Does he have a record? She said. This was not a hostile question. It was an information-gathering question. She was, at her core, someone who gathered information before she moved. Minor stuff, Travis said carefully. Long time ago. Nothing violent. Sarah nodded slowly. Has he said anything? She said. To anyone? About what happened? Not that I can find, Travis said. She looked at the notepad again. She thought about a man she had known for 9 minutes, sitting with her in the rain on a guardrail, saying nothing because she didn't need him to say anything. I'm going to go thank him, she said. Travis was quiet for a moment. Sergeant Merritt, he said. The Iron Brotherhood MC. I know what an MC is, Travis. I just mean the optics. Of what? Of you going there. In uniform. To a biker clubhouse. Sarah picked up the notepad and set it on her nightstand. He sat with me in the rain for 9 minutes, she said. He gave me his jacket. He called 911 and he stayed until I wasn't alone anymore, and then he left without telling anyone his name. She looked at Travis evenly. The optics of me not going are worse. She did not go immediately. She waited 2 more months. This was not cowardice. It was the particular kind of patience that Sarah Merritt had developed over 11 years of military service. The understanding that the right moment to do a thing is not always the first moment you think of it. She had paperwork. She had medical clearance to get through. She had a unit that needed her back at full capacity, and her shoulder took longer than expected. She also had Captain Frank Holloway. Captain Holloway was her commanding officer, and he was, by most measures, a fair man. He was methodical. He was consistent. He applied the same standards to everyone, which in practice meant that his assumptions about things outside his direct experience went largely unexamined. He had grown up in suburban Connecticut and had never, to his knowledge, spoken at length to anyone who rode with a motorcycle club. He found out about Cole in November, when the accident report moved through the unit's administrative chain and the note about civilian bystander prompted questions that Sarah answered honestly. He called her into his office on a Thursday. "Tell me about this man, Denton," he said. "He stopped when no one else did," Sarah said. "He called 911. He kept me calm. He left when the paramedics got there. He's in a motorcycle club." "Yes, sir." "The Iron Brotherhood." "Yes, sir." Holloway was quiet. He had a particular way of being quiet when he was working through something he didn't want to say directly. Sarah had learned to read it. "I'm going to thank him," she said before he could say what he was working toward. "I want you to know that in advance." Holloway's hands folded on the desk. "Sarah," he said, and the use of her first name was its own signal. "I'm not going to tell you what to do with your personal time, but I will tell you that the optics of an NCO from this post making a formal gesture toward an outlaw motorcycle club." "He's not asking for a formal gesture," Sarah said. "He doesn't know I'm coming." "Even so, sir," she said it without heat, without hardness, but with a certainty that didn't leave room for negotiation. He didn't ask himself whether the optics were good before he came down that embankment. He just came down. She paused. "I'm not asking for the Army's endorsement. I'm asking you to know in advance what I'm planning to do." Holloway looked at her for a long moment. "Noted," he said finally. She went on a Tuesday in March, on her day off, in her car. She wore her uniform because she had decided, after long deliberation, that she would not pretend to be something she wasn't when she walked through that door. He had seen her at her worst and had helped her anyway. She could see him clearly and do the same. She had rehearsed nothing. She had figured out what she needed to say when she said it. The Iron Brotherhood clubhouse on Rancier Avenue was a converted auto shop. The bay doors were wide enough for 3 bikes side by side. The walls inside painted a dark green that had faded to something between green and gray, and along the back wall there was a row of Harleys in various states of attention. 2 were obviously in regular use. One was a project. One was the 1984 Shovelhead that Cole Denton was working on when Sarah walked through the door. There were 2 other men in the garage when she arrived. A large man with a red beard who was reading something on his phone with the studied concentration of a man trying to look like he wasn't watching her, and an older man, 60s, who was drinking a cup of coffee by the side door and watching her with no pretense at all. Cole stood up on the floor. He turned around. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe she had been lying down for most of the time she'd known him before. He was a broad man, not heavy, just substantial, the kind of substantial that comes from decades of physical work, from carrying things and fixing things and moving through the world with your hands. His hair was gray at the temples and dark everywhere else, and there was a smear of something across his left cheek. He looked at her the way she had looked at him, searching, finding, settling. "You Cole Denton?" she said. "Depends," he said. "On who's asking." She told him who she was. He wiped his hands. They did not go inside. Neither of them suggested it. They stood in the bay door where the light was better, and the March air moved through, and there was enough space between them to be appropriate to 2 people who did not know each other. "I've been looking for you for a while," Sarah said. "I'm not hard to find," Cole said. "You didn't leave a name." "I left one," he said. "I left Cole." "That's not a full name." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She looked at him. He didn't deflect from the look. Most people would have looked away by now, would have found something else to do with their eyes, some object nearby to give attention to. Cole Denton looked back at her with the patience of a man who had learned that waiting was sometimes the only honest thing to do. "You saved my life," she said. "I helped you out of a ditch," he said. "The paramedics saved your life." "The paramedics got there because you called them," she said. "And I didn't drown before they arrived because you came down that embankment." She paused. "Don't minimize it." Something moved in his expression. Not quite surprise, but the adjustment of a man encountering something he hadn't prepared for. He was quiet for a moment. "I don't have a response to that," he said. "I'm not sure I'm supposed to have one." "You're not," she said. "I'm not looking for a conversation. I came to say thank you. In person. Because you deserve that." The red-bearded man had put down his phone. The older man with the coffee had set his cup on a shelf. The garage had gone quiet in the particular way that spaces go quiet when something is happening that everyone in the space understands matters. Cole looked at her for a long moment. "How's your shoulder?" he said. Sarah blinked. It was such a specific question. Not "how are you?" A general and largely meaningless inquiry. "How's your shoulder?" As if he'd been paying attention to the exact detail of her situation and had filed it away under things worth checking on. "Mostly healed," she said. "I still feel it in the cold." "That'll probably be permanent," he said. "Clavicle doesn't fully forget." "You have experience with that?" "Lay my bike down in 2009, he said. "Right shoulder. 20 years later, I still know when it's going to rain." She almost smiled. She held it together, but barely. "I also wanted you to know," she said, "what it meant that you stayed. Not just a call to 911. That I've thought about. I know you could have called from the road without coming down the embankment. You could have called and kept moving." She stopped, started again with the same steadiness. "You sat with me in the rain. You gave me your jacket. You stayed until I wasn't alone. And then you left without—" She stopped again. "You left without making it about yourself in any way." Cole was looking at the floor now, not avoidant, just giving her words the room to be said without the pressure of being watched. "That's the part one keeps thinking about," Sarah said. "You didn't call anyone. You didn't post anything. You just did it and went home. And I had to spend 3 weeks tracking you down to even find your full name." "I didn't figure it was something worth talking about," Cole said. He said it simply, without false modesty. He meant it exactly as it sounded. "You were in a ditch. Anyone would have." 11 cars passed before the ambulance got there, Sarah said. Cole went still. 11 vehicles, she said. 2 of them slowed down. None of them stopped. He looked up at her. "Anyone didn't," she said. "You did." The garage was completely silent now. The red-bearded man was looking at his hands. The older man had forgotten the coffee entirely. Cole Denton had the expression of a man who had just been handed something he didn't know what to do with. Not because it was unwelcome, but because he genuinely didn't have a framework for it. He had spent 53 years operating on the assumption that he was the sum of his failures and his debts and his complications, that whatever good he'd managed was just the minimum a person owed to the world. Nobody had ever, with this precision, with this specificity, with this much evidence, told him the exact dimensions of what he'd done. He opened his mouth. He closed it again. "Okay," he said. It was not a sufficient thing to say. He knew it wasn't. It was simply what he had. "Okay," Sarah said. She nodded once, a small, clean, complete gesture. "I needed you to know that I know." She turned to leave. She was 6 steps from the bay door when the older man with the coffee said, loudly enough that it wasn't an accident, "Nice to meet a soldier with sense." Sarah turned back. The older man. She would learn later that his name was Bud Garner, that he was the chapter's treasurer and had been riding for 31 years and had a son who'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan, was looking at her without apology. "What do you mean?" she said. "I mean some people," Bud said carefully, "would have sent a card." He paused. "Or sent nothing. Because they'd have been told not to." He let that sit. "You drove across post to a motorcycle club on your day off in your uniform. That took something." Sarah held his gaze. "It took a car and a 20-minute drive," she said. Bud smiled. It was a slow smile, the kind that builds from something real. "Cole," he said, without looking at Cole. "I like her." She left 3 minutes later. She drove back through Killeen with the windows down and the March air moving through the car, and she thought about the look on cold Denton's face when she'd told him about the 11 cars. She thought about the way he'd said, "I didn't figure it was something worth talking about," the exactness of it, the total absence of performance in it. She thought about the weight of his jacket in the rain, the particular smell of leather and oil and cold water, and how she had held it closed with one hand on a guardrail at midnight. She thought about what Holloway had said about optics. She thought about what was going to happen when she got back. She knew before she walked into the building. She could tell from the way Specialist Bowman looked at her when she came through the door. The slight tightening of his expression, the smallest shift of his eyes toward the hallway, the particular quality of stillness that Travis Bowman went very still with when he was trying not to say something that was going to have to be said anyway. "He knows," Sarah said. "He saw your car leave the post," Travis said. "And he knows where you went." Sarah nodded. She went to Holloway's office without being summoned. He was standing when she came in, which was never a good sign. Captain Frank Holloway stood when he was trying to establish that whatever was about to happen was serious. "I told you in advance," Sarah said. "You told me you were going," Holloway said. "You didn't tell me you were going in uniform." "I was on my day off," Sarah said. "I chose my dress." "You were on your day off as a representative of—" "I was on my day off as Sarah Merritt," she said, "who went to thank a man who saved her life." Holloway's hands went to his desk. He was controlled. He was always controlled. But there was something under the control today that she could see working against it. "The Iron Brotherhood MC," he said. "You understand what that association implies." "I understand what the patches on his vest looked like," Sarah said. "I also understand what the man inside the vest did when my car was in a ditch and every other person on Route 190 kept driving." "Sarah." "Sir." She said it without heat, without hardness, but with a certainty that didn't leave room for negotiation. "I'm going to tell you what I know about Cold Denton." She paused. "I know he was coming back from a chapter meeting 40 miles away in the rain at midnight. I know he saw a gap in a fence and turned his bike around because it looked wrong. I know he came down an embankment into a ditch with 6 inches of water in it to help a woman he had never seen before. I know he sat in the rain for 9 minutes and gave me his jacket and called 911 and stayed until I had help. I know he left without telling anyone his name. And I know he did not post about it, did not call a news station, did not seek any acknowledgement whatsoever." She stopped. "That is what I know about Cold Denton." Holloway was quiet. "What he does with his weekends," Sarah said, "and what he wears on his vest, that's what you know about him. And I respect that you need to know those things. That's your job." She met his eyes. "My job, in this particular situation, was to go tell a man who did something important that I know he did it. That is done, and I don't have any regrets about it." The silence in the office was substantial. Holloway looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man recalculating something. "Dismissed," he said. Sarah turned toward the door. "Sergeant Merritt," Holloway said. She turned back. He was looking at his desk. Not at her. At his desk, at some point on the surface of it that required his full attention. "I'm glad you're recovered," he said. It was not an apology. It was not a capitulation. It was something smaller than either of those, and possibly because of that, something more honest. "Thank you, sir," she said. 3 days later, Travis Bowman stopped by Sarah's desk with a look on his face that she had learned to categorize as something happened that you're not going to expect. "You have a package," he said, "at the front desk." It was a box, 12 inches square, wrapped in brown paper. No return address. Killeen postmark. Inside, wrapped in a clean shop rag, was a wrench. It was a socket wrench, a quality one, old but well-maintained, the kind of tool that had been used for years by someone who took care of their things. The chrome still held its finish. The ratchet moved cleanly. There was a note, handwritten on a piece of white paper torn from a notepad, the handwriting large and deliberate, the kind of handwriting a man develops when he spent more of his life using his hands for other things. It said, "For your toolkit. Every soldier should have a good one. CD." Sarah held the wrench in her hands for a moment. She thought about a man who sent no acknowledgement of what she'd said, no response to the words she'd driven across town to say, no indication that he'd been moved by any of it, and then went home and wrapped the tool in a shop rag and mailed it to a soldier he had met twice. She thought about what it meant that his way of saying it mattered was to give her something useful. She put the wrench in her desk drawer in the back, where she kept the things she didn't want to explain to anyone. She went back to the clubhouse once more. Not soon. It was May before she went again, 2 months after the first visit. She went on a Saturday this time, in her own clothes, jeans and a jacket and boots that were not military. She went without rehearsal again. Cole was in the garage again, not working on a shovel head this time. It was done. It sat in the back of the bay, gleaming dully in the afternoon light, its engine clean and whole and silent. He was working on something else, a newer bike, something that had thrown a chain. He looked up when she came in. He did not seem surprised. "I got the wrench," she said. "Good," he said. He went back to the chain. She stood there for a moment. "I don't know what to do with you," she said. It was not an accusation. It was simply the truth. "That's all right," Cole said. "Most people don't." She moved closer, slowly, until she was standing at the edge of the mat he was kneeling on. "What made you turn around?" she said. "That night. What made you actually stop and turn around?" Cole set down the tool he was holding. He looked at the chain for a moment. Then he looked up at her. "My father," he said. She waited. "He was in Vietnam," Cole said. 68. Hugh City. There were men he couldn't get to in time. Men who were left. He paused. "He talked about it my whole life. Not constantly. Not dramatically. Just, it would come up. The way things come up when they haven't finished being processed." He was quiet for a moment. He said the hardest thing wasn't what happened to them. The hardest thing was knowing that they were alone when it happened. That nobody stopped. Sarah was very still. So Cole said, "When I saw the fence, I guess I didn't think it through. I just knew I wasn't going to be the one who kept going." He picked up the tool again. "That's the whole of it," he said. Sarah looked at him, at the top of his head bent over the bike, at the careful way his hands moved on the chain, at the complete and uncomplicated way he occupied the space he was in. "Your father sounds like he was a good man," she said. "He was a complicated man," Cole said, "which I think in the end is the same thing." She stayed for 40 minutes. They talked about bikes and about the Army and about Killeen and about her mother in San Antonio, who was doing better. They talked the way two people talk when they have each established that they mean each other no harm and can now proceed without their guards at full height. When she left, she shook his hand. His hand was large and dry and rough, and it held hers for exactly as long as a handshake is supposed to hold, and then released. She drove back to post in the late afternoon light, the sun coming horizontal through the windshield, thinking about fathers and chains and the specific physics of turning around. She never told the full story to many people. She told Travis, who already knew most of it. She told her mother, who cried in the particular quiet way her mother cried. Not dramatically, just steadily, as if the emotion had been accumulating for a long time and had finally found an exit. She told the story once at a unit gathering when someone made a joke about motorcycle clubs, and she said, without planning to, "I want to tell you about a man who stopped his bike on Route 190 on a Tuesday night in the rain." And the gathering went quiet, and she told it from the beginning, and when she was done, the room stayed quiet for a while longer, which was its own kind of answer. Captain Holloway was at that gathering. He listened to the whole thing without speaking. Afterward, walking to his car, he passed Travis Bowman on the sidewalk and said, not to Travis specifically, not to anyone in particular, just to the evening air, "I should have asked more questions about what kind of man he was before I formed an opinion." Travis told Sarah this the following morning. She thought about it for a long time. Cole Denton did not change his life after any of this. He went to work at the machine shop on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. He went to chapter meetings on the first and third Saturday of the month. He finished the shovel head and started a new project, a 1971 Sportster that he'd been watching on Craigslist for 2 years before the owner finally got to a price that made sense. He called his daughter in Austin every Sunday evening at 7 o'clock, a habit that had started when she went to college and had continued through her marriage and her children and showed no sign of stopping. He did not think about the night on Route 190 very often. When he did, he thought about it briefly and practically, the way a man thinks about something that was difficult at the time, but resolved correctly. He turned around. She was alive. He went home. The math of it was clean. He thought about his father sometimes, too, in the weeks after Sarah's visits. He thought about the stories that had come up over the years, Hugh City and the names his father sometimes said in the dark, and the particular quality of silence that followed those names. He thought about what it had cost his father to carry that, what it had cost his father's silences to hold it. He thought that maybe some debts aren't owed by the person who incurred them, that maybe sometimes the debt passes, not as a burden exactly, but as a direction, a pointing of the compass. He had been pointed toward a ditch on Route 190. He had followed the direction. That was the whole of it. The wrench that he sent, the socket wrench, the good one, the one he'd had for 11 years, had belonged to his father. He didn't tell Sarah that. He wasn't sure he should. He wasn't sure what it would mean to her, or whether the meaning he attached to it was transferable to anyone else. He did know that when he wrapped it in the shop rag and wrote the note on the notepad, he felt not lightness exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that had been dense becoming slightly less so. The way a room feels after you've opened a window. He went back to the shovel head. He listened to the engine. It sounded right. Sarah kept the wrench in her desk drawer for 2 years. When she was transferred to Fort Liberty in North Carolina, she packed it separately, wrapped in the original shop rag, in a box with a few things that required that level of care. When she got to Fort Liberty, she found a drawer in her new desk, and she put it in the back, the same position, with the same deliberateness. Her new CO saw it once, when she was getting something else from the drawer, and asked what it was. "A socket wrench," she said. "I can see that," the CO said. "Why do you keep it in your desk?" Sarah picked it up. She turned it over in her hands, the chrome still holding its finish, the ratchet still moving cleanly after all this time. "Someone gave it to me," she said, "to remind me that tools matter." She set back in the drawer, and that some people use what they have. The CO looked at her for a moment. "Okay," the CO said. Sarah closed the drawer. She would think about Cole Denton at unexpected moments for the rest of her life. She would think about him when she drove past accidents on highways and stopped every time without deliberation. She would think about him when junior soldiers in her unit were afraid to act without instruction, and she would tell them, not the whole story, just the outline of it, that sometimes you don't get to wait for permission, that sometimes the decision is made for you by the simple fact of what you see from the road. She would think about him on the nights when the question of who deserves trust pressed on her, a question that her life and her work required her to hold carefully. She would think about a man whose jacket smelled like oil and cold water, and who asked no questions and made no speeches and stayed exactly as long as he was needed and not 1 minute more. She would think about what it meant that he'd sent the wrench instead of card, that he'd thought, what does this person actually need? And then given her exactly that. She would think about what it meant that the wrench had been his father's. She would understand this, eventually, not all at once, but slowly, in the way that the deepest things are understood. That Cole Denton had sent her something he couldn't replace, because she had given him something he couldn't replace either. She had come to a place where she was not expected and told him with specific, documented, unrefusable precision what he had done and why it mattered. She had taken something he had filed under the minimum a person owes and placed it in a different category entirely. And once a thing is in the right category, it cannot go back. She had given him the exact size and shape of something he had never let himself measure. He had given her a tool that worked. That was the exchange. That was the whole of it. And if you believe, as some people do, as Sarah Merritt increasingly did, that some debts accumulate across generations, that they pass from fathers to sons in the dark and in the silence, that they are carried in the direction of people who are alone in the places where help is least expected, then maybe the accounting of that night on Route 190 goes back further than Cole Denton's decision to turn around. Maybe it goes back to a man in Hugh City in 1968 who made it home and spent the rest of his life pointing his son's compass in the right direction. Maybe the compass is still moving. Maybe it will reach someone else on a road somewhere, in the rain, in the dark, at a moment when 11 vehicles have already passed and the gap in the fence is barely visible, and a person will slow down and stop and turn around and go down into the dark to help. Not because they were told to, not because anyone will know, because they were pointed that way, because somebody a long time ago did not look away. Cole Denton never made the news. Sarah Merritt never gave a formal statement about what happened on Route 190. The Iron Brotherhood MC never issued a press release. This story moved the way most true things move, quietly between people who needed it without announcement. What stays with us isn't the rescue itself. It's what Cole did after nothing. No performance, no claim. Just went home and went to bed and thought about a chapter finance meeting. That is what a person looks like when they've done something good purely because it needed to be done.
The question the story leaves is a real one. How many times have you passed something that looked wrong on an actual road or in a workplace or in a family and kept going because stopping felt more than you were ready for? What would it mean to be even more the person who turned around? Leave that in the comments.
And if these stories find something true in you, stay with this channel. There are more people worth knowing about.